Our epistle reading today is from Galatians chapter 4. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, in order to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as children. And because you are children, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a child. And if a child, then also an heir through God. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Our gospel reading today is from Matthew chapter 2. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people, Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So here we are on December 31st. And many of us can probably identify with the words of the great theologian, Dr. Seuss. How did it get so late so soon? It's night before it's afternoon. December is here before it's June. My goodness, how the time has flown. How did it get so late so soon? He's right, isn't he? How is it already the eve of a new year? Wasn't yesterday just January 1st, 2017? 5 minutes ago, you were a freshman in high school. You blinked, and your kids were all grown up. Is that AARP calling already? How did it get so late so soon? It's hard to tell time when it's going by so fast, yet one of the highest callings of Christian discipleship is to answer the question, what time is it? Matthew, the author of the first gospel, is a time teller. In the time of King Herod, he begins, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. From his gold-draped office, Herod overhears them asking his receptionist about a king of the Jews. And so he takes his comb out of his back pocket and slides it through his greasy hair before straightening his red tie and his Giorgio Armani suit jacket. You can almost hear the theme music swelling as the scene takes place. You're so vain. You probably think this song is about you, don't you? But soon discovering that this song is not about him, Herod does what only those with voices can do. He calls. He calls to order an assembly of chief priests and scribes, a board meeting with clergy who become a party to his sin by laying hands on him. Only power can do that. Only power can summon and assemble, and only the words of the powerful can so effectively commission those who've been so gathered. So we hear the words of Herod's Great Commission. Go, search, find, bring. What will come of Herod's call? What will come of his words? In the opening scene of the 1997 hit film Contact, we're given a front row view of our planet. From the edge of Earth's atmosphere, we can hear a wall of sound beaming from our planet. Radio broadcasts, hit songs, newscasts, and TV shows. And as the cameras begin to move back from the Earth, past the moon, past Mars, and the rest of the planets in our solar systems, all those sounds start to age. We begin hearing music and news from the 1980s, then the 70s, 60s, 50s, and so on. As we pass Saturn, we can even hear the voice of Richard Nixon, "I am not a crook." By the time the Earth is no longer visible and we traverse the edge of our galaxy, we have to lean in real close to hear the sounds. Because as the broadcasts get older, they gradually dwindle. We're light years away from the Earth now, and we can barely hear the music from the Roaring '20s. And finally, the sounds completely peter out as we continue moving farther from the Earth, now in complete silence. All those sound waves head into space, and they just keep going like a radio broadcast that continues relentlessly whether there is anyone out there to hear it or not. And those transmissions do not return from whence they came. Herod's words are transmitted to Bethlehem, broadcast into the world. And these words, by his words, he assembles a council, and by these words, he summons and commissions the wise men. These magi from the east, these political advisors who read the stars and make predictions for this man, now embody the words of their tyrant king as they are sent. Go, search, find, bring. Herod will make it known through his words that he is not accepting applications for King of the Jews at this time. That job is taken. It is not open. Will Herod's words return to him? Do the words of death ever return from whence they come? And what does any of this have to do with time? When the fullness of time had come, says the Apostle Paul, God sent his Son. You see, the Apostle Paul was also a time teller, but he knew about a different time, an all-encompassing time of the Son of God, Jesus Christ. Now, it's easy to take the fullness of time to mean something like the right time or the climax of time, but Paul means something more cosmic, more all-consuming. What would it mean for the Creator of all things, the one in whom and through whom all things exist, to become one with the creature? Well, it would mean that every creature across time and space, including time and space itself, would be drawn into the flesh of the Creator. It would mean that all of time would be transfigured by his time, the time of the Nazarene born in Bethlehem. You see, the fullness of time means that there is no time that is not already transfigured by the presence of the Son. As the 4th century church father Athanasius once said, God became what we are, that we may become what God is. Put differently, God comes into our time that our time may be taken up into his time, making every creature, including you and me, contemporaries of Jesus. This reminds me of a story about the great Swiss theologian Karl Barth. In the early 60s, Barth visited the United States on a lecture tour at the time that evangelical theology was coming to prominence, preoccupying itself with the question of when a Christian was born again. After one such lecture, a young man raised his hand and Barth called on him, and the young man said, "Professor Barth, I was wondering, When were you saved? Now, having spent the entire night fielding questions from ivory tower academics, Bart seemed to receive this question as a respite from his labor, an easy question requiring an easy answer. When was I saved? Bart began. Well, that's easy. I was saved 2,000 years ago. What Karl Barth understood was that on the night when Mary gave birth to the Messiah, all of time was drawn into his flesh, and every human across time and space was, in a sense, born again. About 25 years prior, Barth had written about the miracle of Christmas, while another man was propagating a religious vision of a new humanity. That man's name was Adolf Hitler. Barth, who was banned from teaching in Germany because of his anti-Nazi views, asserted that we cannot achieve the new humanity apart from God. The new humanity does not begin with the Hitlers and the Herods of the world. It begins in Mary's womb, where the Spirit acts as the agent of this new beginning, and where the dividing walls of hostility are broken down in the flesh of Jesus. This is an important word for these times. In these days, it seems necessary to emphasize once again that as well as being evil, racism is a heresy that betrays a fundamental error concerning the person and work of Jesus Christ. If we really want to put Christ back in Christmas, let us recover the subversive nature of this season, the way Karl Barth did before us. This will require us to grasp the word and the words that were made flesh in the manger. Jesus, like Herod, did what only those with a voice can do. He called. He called to order an assembly of Jews, Mary and Joseph, and Gentiles, the Magi. In the original language, the word church means called out assembly, and prior to the Christians, it referred to something like a Greek town hall meeting. Whereas Herod assembles town hall meetings with words, God assembles town hall meetings with the word. Brothers and sisters, this is why, despite declining numbers in church attendance across the United States and all the anxiety that comes with that, the church is going to be okay. We're going to be all right. The same cannot be said of Herod's assembly. You see, Herod's words will not return to him. They go out like a broadcast into space, into a void, never to return from whence they come. Despite the havoc they wreak, the words of death have no substance, no recourse to life. In the Christian tradition, evil has often been described not as a thing, but as a lack, an absence of goodness and being. A good God only creates good things, so evil must not be a thing at all. You might imagine a child digging a large hole in the backyard and then trying to take the shovel and pick up the hole and put it in a wheelbarrow. As hard as the child might try and as frustrated as she may become, you just cannot interact with a hole, with a lack. The word theologians sometimes use to describe evil is absurd. Absurd is something that's completely irrational and inexplicable. We cannot explain its existence or its origins, nor can we understand how it operates. As a lack of being, it cannot be given in any substantive way, nor can it be received. It only receives us, cutting into our humanity like a parasite until there's nothing left. And it touches everything. Nothing escapes death. There is no time that is not bound for death, no time that it does not belong to death. Nobody offers their bodies, their dreams, their aspirations, their words without it all collapsing into the nothing called death. We Christians must take that very seriously. And yet there is an immense draw to death, a profound attraction. Those religious leaders who lay hands on Herod and bless him are intoxicated by death. Death has agents, you know. And sometimes these agents wear stoles and clergy collars and have beautiful preaching voices. Make no mistake, God is their point of reference. But they are intoxicated by the words of death because death's power to kill mimics God's power to give life. See, this is a religious commitment to death. Let us be careful that we do not become religiously committed to death. What these agents do not understand is that there is no reciprocity with death, no process of exchange, no giving and receiving of gifts. With death, this lack, this surd, there is no thing to be given or received. The words of death are transmitted into space, traveling deeper and deeper, relentlessly, until the sounds cease, along with everyone it takes captive. But the surd made flesh in Herod's commission cannot overcome the Word made flesh in Jesus of Nazareth. First in Mary's womb and now in Bethlehem's manger lies a child whose light shines in the darkness, creating in himself a space and a time that transfigures all time, including the time of Herod. This light touches everything. Now there is nothing that escapes Jesus. There is no time that is not bound for Jesus. No time that does not belong to Jesus. The Magi now stand between these words that have no recourse to life. Go, search, find, bring, and the word of life, who will draw them into his own words. Abba, Father. You see, the church will survive because it's assembled by the Spirit of God's Son, whose words, Abba, become our words. We live in this space of the Abba, the space that will never collapse, never close. Unlike the words of death, the prophet Isaiah says that God's word will not return to him empty. It is never broadcast into a void. It echoes back to the Father through the Son, in whom we have been adopted as sons and daughters. Through the Spirit of adoption, the church shares in this reciprocal love between the Father and the Son, this reciprocity that undergirds the universe, the process of gift giving that constitutes the very life of God. The Magi will now be drawn into this great gift of the Son, and they will offer themselves back to the Father through the Son's words. Abba. This gift economy is already beautifully foreshadowed in the giving of frankincense, gold, and myrrh. So what time is it? It's the time of the Spirit of Jesus, who draws all time into the words he offers to the Father. And since we now celebrate Epiphany, the season when Jesus is manifested to the Gentiles, we need to take note of where this manifestation takes place. As some of you may have noticed, my daughters, Paisley and Adeline, have, a unique clothing style. They don't wear their clothes inside out by accident. They do it because they want to. On occasion, and some of you have probably been on the other end of this conversation, someone will politely ask them, "Sweetie, do you realize that your clothes are inside out?" And after looking themselves up and down for a moment, the girls will shoot them a glance, and the look is such that you begin to feel like the stupid one for wearing your clothes right side out. And after a few moments of judging you for your impoverished clothing style, they give a gentle shrug and they respond, "We know." On Christmas and Epiphany, the outside becomes the inside, and the edge becomes the center. The Magi did not expect to find their king among a group of peasant Jews sleeping in a filthy feeding trough in Roman-occupied territory. What if you were told that your king would be born out of wedlock to a homeless teenager in an over-policed ghetto on the other side of Dallas? Would you believe it? Jesus entered the periphery so that all of time and history could be drawn into that space. Despite appearances, the poor and destitute literally have time and history on their side. If discipleship entails the craft of time-telling, then we must learn to say that the time of the Spirit is the time of the wretched of the earth. For truly, wherever we feed the hungry and welcome the stranger and clothe the naked and visit the prisoner, in those spaces, that is where we find Jesus. Christmas and Epiphany are all about recognizing that our God is an upside-down God, a God who draws the edges to the center. People will certainly ask us along the way, don't you realize your God is inside out? May the spirit of adoption transform our minds and our sense of time so thoroughly that our natural response will be to shrug and say, we know. Amen.